welcome. We are very lucky today to have as a guest our first actual Hollywood celebrity and my former professor, Howard Suber, who just did this wonderful show, The Power of Film, which was on TCM, Turner Classic Movies, a few weeks ago. And I understand it's going to be rerun two more times this year on TCM, which is a wonderful film about motion pictures and really how they're structured, what they mean, and how they affect us as audiences, and which ones stand the test of time, which are truly popular and memorable. I think I have that right. I just want to say a few words about Professor Suber. First of all, I got an email from a cousin of mine who hadn't been speaking to me saying, when you were at UCLA, did you know Professor Suber? We noticed your name in the credits. So I want to say he's a man of great integrity because I wrote to him, actually. I saw my name in the credits. I said, oh, what did I contribute to this film? What great insight did I have as a student that you remembered for 30 years? And he said, oh, you made a donation when it was starting to the project, and I promised I would give everyone credit. And he did, a man who was true to his word. You can go to the bank on it. So I want to say thank you. I salute you for that, especially for someone in Hollywood. So already that raised my esteem with some of my cousins. Yes, I was a student of Professor Suber in his film structure class. And also I was a student of Professor Suber in what was a pilot program he organized where we had all the latest super equipment of those days, which is sort of like the Stone Age now, but we had Steenbecks and 16mm cameras and video editing suites with high-tech controls and so forth and so on. But of course, now that's all looks like something that's ancient history. Pardon?
I was also chair of your doctoral committee.
Well, I was just going to, you've ruined my surprise because I got my dissertation from UMI here and I wanted to show, of course, White never shows up on this thing. It's incredible. But anyway, there's a book here, which the special effect won't show, but Professor Suber signed my doctoral dissertation right on the inside here, but you can't see it. I didn't test that out. This is why I never rely on it, but I'm grateful to him for almost everything that's happened in my education. It was very worthwhile. He taught at UCLA for 53 years, developed and chaired the program in film history, theory, and criticism, was director and one of the founders of the UCLA Film Archives. He was the founding chair of the Film and Television Producers Program. He was the Dixon Emeritus Professor at UCLA, one of the highest awards they have for retired faculty member. And his classes on storytelling have inspired many, many, many famous film screenwriters, directors, and so forth. One of the most famous was actually Alexander Payne, who was in the non-producers program, just using a little Super 8 camera. I felt very superior to him then. I feel very inferior to him now because it shows what's in here is more important than anything that's out there. Others, David Cupp, Alex Cox, Gregory Nava, Gabe Verbinski, Doug Prey, who produced the show that we're talking about today, and many, many more. With that, I think enough said. He's also been an expert witness on big copyright cases. He wrote a book on copyright and creativity with a lawyer. And he also wrote another book, Letters to Young Filmmakers, with advice to young filmmakers, all available on Amazon and your local bookstore. And with that, I just want to start out by saying, Professor Suber, thank you. How can you describe the reaction to this series? Was it what you expected? Was it different? Have you heard from people? And what has the reaction been?
Excuse me. It's been overwhelming. TCM is not one of the big networks, although it's well known in Hollywood because it shows nothing but old Hollywood films. So it's a perfect audience for this series. But I have heard from so many people, including many students from your generation, Larry, and beyond, going back 50 some years, people I haven't heard of for 50 some years, as well as students scattered over that period of time. So that's been deeply gratifying, and a lot of personal emails and things on the internet, and some major figures I won't name in the industry who were very nice about it too. So I'm glad I kept at it for all those years.
Well, I don't think our audience knows, but it began, the book came out in 2006, and I think that's when you started trying to make it into a documentary television show, but it took until now. Can you tell us a little bit about that process? One of your themes, I know, is perseverance. You showed true grit, perseverance. How did it get made?
Well, it's worse than you describe. The title, "The Power of Film," occurred to me 44 years ago, and excuse me, it was a period in which I met Joseph Campbell, who had a series on PBS at the time called "The Power of Myth," and I met him, and we had lunch, and he and I debated one another in front of a bunch of other people, and while there was much that I learned from him, I had several things that I disagreed with him about. But I kept saying to myself, the power of myth, the power of film. I like that title. And so I've had that title in my head for, as I say, 44 years. And it's one of the ironies of my life that I didn't publish my first book until I was in my 70s. I was a late bloomer to a large extent because I was involved in starting 3 major programs in the film school at UCLA. And so I did a lot of other things, administrative things, and did not do the writing I was supposed to do to get promoted as a professor. So there I was in my 70s with my first book. I've had 2 more since then. And we're talking about another one, we'll see. I'm now 87, so I'm definitely a late bloomer.
Okay, but how did it go from being a book to a Turner Classic Movies program?
Well, I've always felt, or felt for the 50 some years that I've taught film, excuse me, that the best, most effective way of teaching film or looking at films, and I don't just mean viewing them, I mean examining them and trying to figure out what makes them tick, is to, as closely as possible, be looking at the films while you're talking about them, or at least while I'm talking about them. So when I started back in the late 60s, it was virtually impossible for me or anybody else to get my hands on old films. And I would let the students vote for the films they wanted to see. And invariably, they voted for what were then contemporary films because that's all we could get our hands on. So a good portion of the films that are now on the screen in back of you, I first saw when they came out in theaters originally. They were contemporary films. Well, one of the values of doing anything long enough is that over time you see how things change and also how they don't change. And you see how things last and how they don't last. For example, when I started teaching in the 1968, one of my very first courses was entirely devoted to Citizen Kane, which then and for at least 25 years after that was considered in virtually all polls around the world as the greatest film ever made. Today, they don't do as much polling as they used to, but IMDb, the International Movie Database, which is owned by Amazon, still does a real-time poll. Anybody can vote on it, and it's a list of 250 of what people consider the greatest films. Today, as I say, for at least 25 years, it was always Citizen Kane every year that was number one. Today, Citizen Kane is number 107, which some of my fellow professors, both at UCLA and beyond, are shocked and indignant by and say, that can't be. Young people are not seeing this great, magnificent film. And my response is, because I mean, in the series, I often refer to the Greeks, and I talk about Shakespeare. So I'm an old guy talking about a lot of old stuff, including stuff that came out last year. But my span is 2,500 years, going back to Aristotle and the ancient Greeks and Oedipus Rex and so on. And so I've always been aware that in the arts, it's like the stock market. Stocks go up, stocks go down. There's new stuff that people get excited about. And we all have a limited amount of time in our own day. And when something new comes along that we feel we must see, that means that there's not going to be time to see something else that a previous generation or several previous generations thought was mandatory for you to be an educated person. So I'm not, I mean, I loved Citizen Kane. I kept on teaching it. I haven't taught it in several years. I'm not going to fight history. There are other films equally as good to talk about that are more on the same wavelength, simpatico, whatever cliche you want to use to describe the process. You know, we all die, ideas die, works of art die, or they go into hibernation. However you want to describe it, you can't get upset that the younger generation doesn't have time any longer in their schedule to pay attention to what you paid attention to.
Okay. I think there's a picture of Orson Welles with John Huston over your shoulder for people who are
Yes,
watching. I don't know if you can see it on your phone, but if you're on a laptop or a big screen, one of the things you talk about in the movie,
that was that was taken by a then student in my class who was the assistant cameraman on the other side of the wind, which was
oh,
Welles's last film.
right. And I heard you in one of the other interviews on YouTube saying that was some of it was filmed at UCLA in the sound stages, and you had arranged for that. So
Yeah.
that's a connection there that people should be aware of. Um, in the TV show, you say you want to know what's popular and memorable. And in another interview online, you listed some principles all in a line that people are trapped, that you shouldn't write about what you know, that motivation, who can tell? Success is not something a hero aspires to. Happiness is not possible for a hero. Hollywood films don't have to have a happy ending, etc. Would you say, and also the importance of the word but and paradox, would you say you were looking for a formula that all these films had to have, or are these just characteristics that some share and some don't that you've found in the years you've been studying films?
Over my career, I have often talked to people or heard people talk who claimed they had found the formula for success in Hollywood. I have always smiled wanly, whatever that means, whenever I've heard these. It's a principle of all art that, and I talk about this in the series, that art thrives on throwing out the old or taking the old and combining it with something brand new that it had never been brought together with, that in fact often, like science, people said should never be brought together, but they were brought together to create something new. New is the most ubiquitous word in the arts, and it's the most ubiquitous word in film. If you say to somebody you're accustomed to seeing movies with, used to be often on a Friday night when that was theaters were the only place you could see a film, you often would say to someone like that, you want to see a movie? The answer is usually, yeah. Then what's the next question? What do you want to see? What's the next question, Larry, after that? We've agreed to see a movie.
What are the new films?
Okay, then I tell you, let's see this new film, Moonlighting, right there in back of your right ear, which is 2 or 3 years old. So let's see Moonlighting. If you've never heard of it, what do you ask me?
What's it about?
Exactly. We want to know what's it about. Now, what we don't want as an answer is, well, it's about this black guy who lives in Miami, who has a sad childhood, and he gets beaten up. And we don't want a description or recapitulation of the whole damn plot. That's not what we're asking when we say, what's it about? We're asking, what's it about in the sense of what's at its core? The answer in the case of Moonlighting as in so many films, is love. It's about love and betrayal, which, as you mentioned, I find is betrayal is one of the commonest things we see in memorable films. And we see it there in films that are memorable because we've all been betrayed and we know what it feels like. We know the rage we feel over the betrayal, and we know that it hurts. And it doesn't really get any better, even if we laugh at it. It still hurts decades later. So I don't look for formulas because there are no formulas. The corollary for what I was just saying about how Citizen Kane was #1 and now is 101 or 2, the corollary to that is nothing lasts, you and I included. Nothing lasts. So we shouldn't get upset if our favorite film nobody cares about anymore, nobody wants to see, it's never shown. The same thing is true in all of the arts. Same thing is true in us. And that's part of the process of life, which is it rejuvenates itself with other people or other works. And so as long as I'm looking at the poster in back of you, it's not the latest version because there are several, we made a point of including several more recent films.
I just got it off the internet. I'm sorry.
Sorry. In fact, I wanted to include the film that I expect will win the Academy Award for Best Picture in a few weeks.
Not Barbie?
I'm sorry?
Not Barbie?
Not Barbie. I said when I saw, give me the title, Larry.
Oppenheimer?
Oppenheimer. I said when I saw it, this film is going to sweep the Academy Awards and is going to join my list of memorable popular films. You see, for years, I thought of offering courses on the most popular films. And every time I had this idea, this is an idea I had many times over 50 some years. And I'd say, gee, that would be a good idea. Well, what films would I have to show? And I would look, and of course, the way you determine, we're quite fortunate in this regard. If you try to determine, let's say, what are the best paintings, the best you can do is get opinions and the evaluation of critics and professors and museum people. With film, we've got box office receipts. That doesn't prove you're good, it proves you're popular. And so I would go, when I had this idea, and look at what were the most commercially successful films. And in the background at one point in the series, I show a screen of the most successful films, as they phrase it, by which they mean the films that made the highest grosses. And they've got a list of which I show maybe 15 of the top 20 films. And my students always laugh at that list because they're films that made $1 billion that my students and people who love film laugh at. They may be very popular in terms of the box office, but they're not the kind of films that last over a period of decades with people who have a serious interest in film. So what I realized over a period of time was what I really wanted to talk about were memorable popular films. That is to say, I see Casablanca over your right temple. I see Toy Story and The Godfather, Rebel Without a Cause, King Kong, Gone with the Wind, Star Wars. You're blocking a bunch of others, Alien, and so on. Thank you, Larry. Frankenstein, E.T. Those are the kind of films. I mean, we're talking about today, as I was doing in my last class at the end of 53 years, which was 4 years ago, we're talking about Casablanca, which was 1942. We're still talking about an ancient film. It's not true that young people won't look at any film over 10 years old or 20 years old. They won't look at many of them, but I'm interested, why are they still willing to look at Casablanca? The Godfather last year celebrated its 50th anniversary. A 50-year-old film? In our society, anything that can last 50 years is an incredible phenomenon. Well, in movies, there aren't a lot. In my series, which is 6 episodes, each 40-some minutes long, I show clips from 275 films. Well, when I'm being my most generous in defining what do I mean by memorable popular films, I can't get to 400. I have to admit that what I'm now including are films usually that were popular, that is to say, big box office, but nobody wants to look at now. Or they've heard of the film, but the audiences, my audiences, my students, have heard of him, but never got around to looking at him. So that's in comparison to, figures vary, but there's at least 100,000 feature films that have been released in American history. A tiny, tiny fraction of those are memorable in that sense. Every year, there are films today that make $1 billion. But that doesn't mean that they're going to anybody's going to want to talk about them next year.
So you're really saying, it seems to me, what makes a classic? Your Turner Classic Movies was the perfect venue for your series, because you're trying to find the definition of a classic. Am I wrong?
No, you're right. I decided, since I had decades to think about this, I decided over the decades, classics is too much of a red flag for too many people who will say, why didn't you include that film? What are you putting that piece of garbage in for? They equate, we all do this, Larry, they equate the word classics with my favorite films. And one of my major lawsuits involved a competing network that used to show a lot of old films, but then decided to focus on horror films, made a lot more money that way. And they changed their whole format and got sued by the company that hired me, that was running them, which sued them because they said, we contracted 10 years ago with you for classic films, and now you're showing contemporary horror films. That's not what our network is. And this network's response was, well, any film is a classic to somebody. And I had to say, that's right. So the word itself is meaningless, because if somebody says, well, I don't have any on it. Well, here, I see right. No, now you're blocking it. Move your head over this. Okay, there's a tiger here. Oh, come on. I'm blocking the name of this film, which is 3 or 4 years old.
Unfortunately, it's so small on my screen. Oh, I see it's behind my shoulder.
Yeah, it's
I can't remember it either.
yeah. All right.
There's a tiger, but I don't remember.
There's a film that I thought when it came out might last. It was, I'm saying 4, maybe 5 years ago. I was wrong. It hasn't lasted, and I don't even include it in the series. I may have taken it out in more recent versions of that poster. But that's a perfect example of the process I'm talking about. That struck me as a classic, in quotes, 4 or 5 years ago. Well, I was wrong. I've been wrong about a lot of films. And I would never have predicted that Citizen Kane would be 101 on the Internet Movie Database today.
Well, even Shakespeare went out of favor for many, many years. So.
Oh yeah. Well, as I said, nothing lasts.
But some things come back, as you said. So
Yeah.
let me ask you a question. You don't want to call it a classic, but films that have stood the test of time. Has Ted Turner contacted you since? It's still his network, right? That's why it is a T in it.
No, he's not involved.
He has nothing to do with it? Because he bought up the MGM collection and
That's correct.
felt he vastly overpaid, but he said, I believe in it, and he made a go of it. So let's go on. You yourself had a background, I believe, growing up in Owasso, Michigan, and there was a writer there who was very well known in the 1920s who built a castle named James Oliver Curwood.
Right.
And I asked you if you knew about Curwood Castle in the prep, and you said, yes, you did. He was somebody who was very popular. Plays were made out of his stories. Silent movies were made out of his stories. I think even most recently, The Bear, which was a pretty recent film, was made from one of his stories. Apparently, he was like Jack London, but for the Hudson's Bay Company. What was his influence on you, just in thinking in terms of popularity and in writing? Because you came out of the same town and you went to Harvard, you talked your way in, and you then came to Hollywood, and you were going to be a screenwriter. I'd just like to know a little about the personal element of your love of film.
Where do you want me to begin with that?
Curwood Castle.
Curwood Castle was on the banks of the Shiawassee River. I was born in Owasso, named after Chief Owasso, in the county of Shiawassee in the state of Michigan, Michigami. three different Indian chiefs who somehow all lost their land and were forced to emigrate. And I'm looking at my wife of 65 years, and he asked me about Kerwood Castle. She also was raised in Owasso.
Yeah, not a bad place to come from. I know you're having a good chat. I'm going to interrupt you. I just wanted to say hello.
Oh, okay, we'll try and wrap it up in a few minutes then.
Okay, I don't need them. You can have them.
Oh, okay.
Talk about obsolescence.
So did you marry your high school sweetheart?
No, we wouldn't talk to each other in high school because our parents were friends. And so the last people you're going to date are the people your parents want you to, right? So we both had to go away to college, and I had to discover the girl next door had grown up. So I would bet you that at best, two people who might listen to this broadcast, both of them over 70, have heard of James Oliver Curwood. When I was a high school student, I had heard of him. I didn't know of a single person who had read him, and therefore neither did I. He was in the Chamber of Commerce's brochures, to be sure, but it's just like most Chamber of Commerce. They find somebody who a couple of people might have heard of, and that's their claim to fame. Curwood was very popular, as you say, in the 20s. Probably made more money than Jack London, but did not go in the annals of great writers of the 20s, and never left home. So his reputation probably was limited to Shiawassee County.
Okay.
So,
you did leave home. You got out of Owasso and you went to Harvard. You talked yourself in. You were state debate champion. Is that right?
yeah,
arguing for direct election, which is still being debated today.
Yes. Boy, how did you find that?
The internet,
Oh, of course. Yeah, that was, I was fortunate enough to have a life-changing experience in I was a junior in high school. I won the Detroit Free Press, sponsored a competition in the state of Michigan for the top debater in the state. And so I got that title, and with it, my father had told me the year before, I had three brothers, two of whom had been to University of Michigan and Michigan State, but he told me the business was bad and it didn't look like he was going to be able to afford to send me to college. So I was on my own. And so winning that scholarship and getting the biggest event of my life was getting on the front page of the Detroit Free Press and getting hired for the summer to work in the Detroit Free Press writing obituaries. That talked me out of wanting to be a journalist, but I still wanted to write. But anyway, it changed my life because I never knew anybody from Owasso, Michigan, then or now. It may have changed in the 60 some years since then, who'd been to Harvard or any of the Ivy League schools, and therefore, like a lot of other people from not affluent schools, I didn't think of even trying to get into one of the schools that were filled with affluent people. And it would never have occurred to me, but I had this scholarship in my hands, and it would have paid for 2 years of Harvard's tuition. And so I went to Cambridge, and I asked to be interviewed, and I was not a good high school student because I was debating all the time. And while I was at Harvard, I was not a good student because I ran a group called Ivy Films, which was a student film society, and running a lot of what are now the great historic foreign films of the 50s and 60s. And it wasn't until I got to UCLA and was a graduate student in film that I found a subject that I loved, that I became a good student and ended up being an academic, which was the last thing I thought would ever happen to me. So be careful what you predict for your future.
Well, this is also one of your themes in the television show, Destiny and Fate, and the difference between them. And in one of your radio or podcast interviews, you also used another term. I don't think that was in the TV show, the Goya principle, which was not about the Spanish painter, but it was get off your ass. You seem to have gotten off your ass and gone to get what you wanted with great perseverance. I'm just wondering how you relate that to your love of classic films. Are they often the story of a Horatio Alger character who does exactly what you did?
No. As they say in one episode, when I'm showing Wall Street, which a lot of people think is about Wall Street, and I asked the viewer, what are the value systems that everybody in the world, including a few Americans, know characterizes us? What is it that people, as young people, this did not characterize me as when I was in high school, but it did most of my friends. What is it you're supposed to aspire to? Well, a big car, a big fancy expensive car, a trophy spouse, if you're so inclined today, and a big mansion. And then I say in the series, name 3 memorable, popular American films for which that's true of the protagonist. And I've played this game for decades with my students. And I always get Wall Street, which in fact is not about Gordon Gekko, the guy who says greed is good. It's about the kid who's inspired by Gordon Gekko, who wants to be just like him, whose old man is a labor union organizer of the very union that Gordon Gekko is trying to buy, the big airplane company that he's the head of, and he's planning to fire them all. And what the kid who begins idolizing Gordon Gekko learns is that helping other human beings is more important than trophy spouses and big cars and so on. And I invite your audience to think of memorable popular films. 3, that's not a lot out of 100,000 American feature films. 3 that were memorable, popular, that are about what we all know is what so many Americans aspire to.
All right. But also some Americans aspire to the house and the picket fence and the wife and the kids and the dog and middle class satisfaction. They did some polls and most people don't actually want to be the boss. I think you've hit on something, and then I want to talk a little bit about how you actually made this and with the Ateratron.
Okay.
But you were quoted in this UCLA official PR thing. At one point, you were working on a book called, because it relates to what you just said, especially the number 3, Sacred Dramas for a Secular Society, with the thesis that certain films serve the same purpose for secular audiences that religious stories serve for people of faith. Now, in the TCM series, your last chapter is about love. And one of the types of love you talk about is Christian love, essentially, religious love, and loving kindness. And you seem to say that is a theme you find. To what extent, you were talking about myth and Joseph Campbell, but to what extent is there a religious element to going to the movies, that they are the cathedrals or mega churches or maybe parish churches for a lot of people, or at least played that role?
I think it's true that a lot of people, at least through much of the history of American film, used to walk out of movie theaters uplifted, in much the same way some people, excuse me, some people go to their church, synagogue, whatever, and feel uplifted at the end of it. They feel better about life in general, about their own lives, and they have enhanced hope, or if you will, faith, because and I use those 2 terms as essentially being synonymous or near each other, because both require a belief in something you cannot prove. If you could prove your hope or your faith was real to non-believers, if you could say, here, look at this, some people think they can, others just give up and curse the non-believers or the non-belief. But by definition, I cannot prove to you if you do not believe this in the same kind of sense of hope that I do, or the same sense of faith, that this is real. The proof will come later, either in the afterlife or in terms of those people who, well, like so many of the thousands of would-be filmmakers that I've taught. I would often say to them, what you're trying to become, whether you're a writer, director, producer, whatever, is analogous to somebody who says, I want to win a gold medal at the Olympics. People do. Somebody, several people every year are going to make it. They're going to fulfill that dream. They're going to become famous and maybe even rich, at least for a while. Most won't. And therefore, what you need is faith, faith in yourself. And that's where one of the major things I talked about that you referred to a few minutes ago, I talk about the difference between fate and destiny. Fate is that which we were given. Therefore, we shouldn't be able to claim credit or blame for whatever it is. We're such and such a height, we have or don't have hair, our nose, our eyes, our height, all of these things, including I got into Harvard because a rich newspaper gave me the money to buy at least a couple of years. My parents couldn't have afforded to send me, but I lucked out. Now, sure, I worked very hard. That's where I learned the Goya principle. I had to work very hard if there's going to be a chance for me. It could have worked out also that I went into my father's dry cleaning business as three of my three brothers did. That's where the Goya principle comes in. Get off your ass. We're given various things for which we deserve, as I say, neither credit nor blame. But out there's something that in the 19th century, Greeley, the New York journalist, Horace Greeley, said, "Go west, young man," and so on. Well, he coined the phrase, or at least it's attributed to him, manifest destiny. And that became a really important part of American ideology, if you will, of the American value system. Go west, conquer all of the nation between the East Coast and the West Coast and make it ours. But you got to get off your ass and take it. It's not going to be given to you. Things that are given to you are part of your fate. You don't get credit, nor should you get blame, in my judgment, for those things. You're just not responsible one way or the other. You are responsible for getting off of your ass and fighting the fear that we all face much of our lives, that bad things are going to happen, that we're never going to make it, and that we're never going to realize whatever our hopes, dreams, faith are. Well, one of the things you didn't quote that I don't make as much of a point about, it's towards the end of the series. I don't think there's a lot of examples of the Horatio Alger story. There were in the teens and 20s when the Horatio Alger series was very popular. But Americans in general have become too cynical. The world has become too cynical to still believe that pluck and luck is all it takes to have that mansion and that car and that trophy spouse.
But what about to marry the girl next door and have a nice life and have your dreams realized?
That is, I think, very much still part of the American ethos. And one of the things I think many Americans have a problem with is blaming other people who fail to fulfill our dreams. So if somebody is living on the streets, far too many of us simply blame them that they didn't have enough grit, to use an old-fashioned term, that they didn't have enough drive, worse, that they were lazy. It's part of human history that a very large share of any population anywhere fails to fulfill its childhood dreams. If you look at, to take a very old film, It's a Wonderful Life. Still one of my favorite films, certainly seems to be memorable, but it's probably falling away because it's not shown on TV as much as it used to be. Here you have a guy whose dream as a young man is to get out of this bird, to be somebody, to make something of himself, to learn to fly, to be an architect, do something. Certainly sounds like a good American to me. Do something. Well, he vows to get out of this town. He never does. He's still stuck in this little town, and he's stuck having helped poor people in this town who are being oppressed by the rich banker. Typical American popular story. But along this way of the story, he makes a choice, which I claim elsewhere in the series is crucial to the formation. I won't even call them heroes, of just central characters. The most important thing a hero does, or the central character does, if they're going to do something heroic, is to make a decision. And the word decision comes from the same root as scissors. Because when you and I, in real life, make a decision, we're cutting ourselves off from a potential opportunity that we know might come to us, which is one reason making decisions is so hard for everybody. If I do this, I can't do that. Well, if I go down this road, I might get a chance to blah, blah, blah. And so it's hard to say, no, I'm going to go this way. Well, George Bailey makes a decision 1 hour into It's a Wonderful Life, when the bank is being subjected to a run that will mean it'll go bankrupt. He's got a wad of $2,000 he's been saving up for years to marry. Here's your person you just talked about. He wants to marry the girl next door. And although he talks as a young man in high school about going away and becoming an architect or flying, doing something, getting out of this bird, he's that person you were just talking about, somebody who at heart really wants to settle down with the sweet young thing next door and raise a passel of kids, and it's okay. But it's important to remember the film opens with George planning to commit suicide because he thinks he's a failure. Because not of something he did, it's actually his uncle who's lost $2,000 and can't find it. And George, as the guy who is the manager of the bank, is going to be foreclosed on. And so George is actually planning to jump off that bridge that we see him on in the beginning. So they finally, as we knew was going to happen, they finally find it. The bad banker stole it. But George's friends come to rescue him. And you remember the last line of the film?
You're the luckiest man in town?
That's one of them. That's good.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No man. No, I just blew it. I just had it.
No man is a failure who has friends.
That's it. That's it. And I choke up every time I watch that film because it says, as you said correctly, to millions of Americans who now realize, if they had lost their faith, that they are one of the luckiest people alive because they have friends who will come to their rescue when they are in the most dire of circumstances, who will stand by them. And at that crucial moment, George is being contrasted with Mr. Potter, the curmudgeonly old banker, played by Lionel Barrymore, who is this mean, grasping guy who's the richest man in town, and that's all they can think of is money, money, money. George triumphs over Mr. Bailey. Is George, I'm sorry?
Mr. Potter.
Potter, thank you. George is Mr. Bailey. Does he, what does he get? He gets to stay out of jail. He's never left this podunk town that he wanted to do as a kid. He's never fulfilled those dreams he had as a young man. And I think one of the reasons that particular film gets so many other people bawling at the end is because it's the story of our lives. Few are the number who succeed in fulfilling their dreams of youth. But the film says quite clearly is you don't have to fulfill those dreams. You were young then. You didn't really know what values counted. You have fulfilled these other dreams that are far more valuable to you than the ones that you saw as a teenager.
Well, thank you. I think that's so good that we probably should just wrap it up with that. I'd like to know more about the Interatron and how much better it is than Zoom, but we'll have to save that for another time, I guess.
Okay,
Because it's such a good way to end, with the that insight. And I want to thank you for making the series. I hope you'll consider doing your sequel on sacred dramas for secular society, because I think, even It's a Wonderful Life, there's an angel in it who's
yes,
a key character. And
yeah,
every time a bell rings, an angel gets his wings. So I would be looking forward to that, because there's so many films that feature angels and religious themes, either explicitly or implicitly. And of course, you said your original background was in theater history, and you were teaching Oedipus Rex and Greek drama. And of course, that started out as a religious ritual in ancient Greece. So there is some through line to this, as seculars it may seem to people. I do believe you're onto something there, and I hope you'll pursue it. That said, last word to Professor Suber. Remind everyone the series will run again twice more this year on TCM, and the book, The Power of Film, is available at Amazon and elsewhere. Also, Copyright and Creativity, and also Letters to a Young Filmmaker. So you can have a whole little Howard Suber library. And now they'll have to have someone else in the brochure from OWASA, in addition to James Oliver Curwood. I hope they'll put Howard Suber in as well. So
well, it's also Owasso, Michigan is the birthplace of Tom Dewey.
oh, okay. So there you go. All right. So thank you. We look forward to many, many more years, as our people say, bis 120. You said you started writing at 80. Moses led the Jews out of Egypt at 80. So
Yeah,
there's a lot. I saw George Abbott in New York at 102 or 103. He was directing Marakova in a revival of On Your Toes. So some
so
people
there's hope
keep
yet.
going a long time. What?
So there's hope yet.
There's hope yet. So thank you, and we look forward to your next project and following you online and with The Power of Film. So we'll end
Thank
the
you, Larry.
recording now.